If I'm just sitting here staring at the screen, it looks like everything is loading. I'm going to give it another minute to do its thing, and hopefully it'll work for me. Okay, it looks like theoretically we should be live. Let's see. Yes, okay. Sorry, for some reason technology is totally eluding me today. I don't know, my Facebook is weird. I think it needs an update, what do I know? In any event, welcome, and thank you for joining me for another Technical Tuesday. I figured we needed something kind of fun and researchy on this really dreary, cold Tuesday. So I spent my morning going down a really fun rabbit hole for all of you guys. So thank you for the reason for doing that. We are going to be reading the address book as a part of HAF's book club starting tonight. And I've been reading that, so that got me kind of thinking, okay, Albany Streets, the address book looks a little bit about street names and addresses and what they mean and tell you about neighborhoods and whatnot. So of course, my first thought is obviously Albany Streets. And since there literally is a book written about Albany street names, I had to read one and then the other kind of in tandem. And I started going through it, and it's a really great, so moving on from the address book though, the Cradle of the Union really is a great book about Albany street names. We know a lot about the bird and mammal streets because everybody loves, you know, Hawk Street and Tiger, and the whole thing about Washington Avenue and how it was Lion Street, and the lion was the king of the jungle, and Lion Street then became King Street, and then it became Washington, who didn't want to be king, and yeah. But we don't talk about as much some of the other streets in Albany. I mean, there are thousands of streets in Albany. And as I was reading Cradle of the Union and looking up some of the street names, I realized that it's a great alphabetical listing of all of the streets, but the way my mind works is maps. And so I need to see it all graphically laid out. So what do? I start printing and annotating and labeling really boring Google Maps. So I figured all of you might benefit from that while looking at some really fun, pretty old maps. I know these come out a lot. So if you get boring, you can just let me know, obviously, in the message comment, you know, please stop using the same old maps. I know everyone knows now the 1876 and the 1857, but they're kind of cool and, you know, fun to look at. So we'll just keep going as long as you guys are okay with that. Oh, hold on. Now I've got sound feedback. Come on. Okay. Again, bear with me, my technological challenges. Okay, so street names. I wanted to look at the South End because we don't look at that a whole lot. It kind of gets, I don't want to say ignored, but that's where my mind went first, was the South End, and obviously the numbered streets, all the avenues that were numbered, which is where my mind went first. And then as I started researching this morning, looking at what streets I really wanted to talk about, I kept coming across all the streets around Schuyler Mansion, and it was kind of fun. So I figured I would share a bit of that with you. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, which, as I said all the time, is infinitely more fun than watching me talk because I'm boring. No one needs to see that. Let me pull up some of my maps. Okay, so I'm going to start with the 1876 because that shows everything nice, big, and very clearly. And then we can move on to a couple others. How's that? Okay, share screen. Where's the button? Ignore everything else on my screen. There's tons of stuff up today because, you know, there's like 80 things going on today. It's one of those busy days. It's a good thing. Busy is good. Okay, hopefully everybody can see the map I've got going here. All right, so what we are looking at right now is the 1876 Hopkins map, right where Schuyler Mansion is. You can see it labeled nicely in the middle there, the estate of EC, clearly I need my eyesight checked, EC McIntosh. And what drew me here was, obviously, I knew initially there were a few streets obviously named for Schuyler, shock. Catherine, obviously his wife, and Elizabeth, his daughter. But the more I looked into it, the more I kept wondering, okay, well, how far out does it go? Obviously, Philip is on the periphery, sort of. That doesn't quite make it to Morton Avenue. But so what are the Schuyler streets? I know in Cradle of the Union, he references that there are 6 Schuyler streets. I suppose there are more, potentially. but they're older street names. And so as I'm looking at these, I'm also going to reference a fantastic document put out by the Albany County Hall of Records. If you don't have a physical copy of this, I believe they still have them potentially in print, but they did put it online. So I'm going to share that here now. There is a great document. I get the title of it. Obviously, I've been using this a lot. Inside Out, Finding a Sense of Place. This is an awesome guide for doing research. But the best thing about this document is at the end, there is a list of street names and when they were changed, what they were changed from. So it has a list of, I'd say the majority. I've come across a few that weren't on here. And of course, my copy is annotated in red pen because obviously. But yeah, it's a great list. So if you're researching your house or another property, especially if it's in the older neighborhoods, whether you're Center Square or definitely the South End, there were so many name changes. So it's definitely worth referencing this. So of course, as I'm looking around Schuyler Mansion, I keep cross-referencing this document, which I think actually educated quite a bit. So I'm going to go back to the map again. All right, so we already talked a little bit about Catherine. Of course, I'm pointing the screen too, so because you can see that. So we've got Catherine, his wife, Elizabeth, we know his daughter, Hamilton's wife, Hamilton, represented here. What I didn't know, and I'm sure some of you Schuyler and Hamilton aficionados obviously already know, is there are other streets around here named for his family. So Morton Avenue appears to be named for Schuyler's daughter, Cornelia. Her husband was Washington Morton. And there's a really interesting story on that, I have to say. I highly recommend reading Cradle of the Union, because there is a great bit on Morton Avenue and an awesome little anecdote about apparently how Morton and Schuyler were not at all friends, and he actually got escorted off the property when trying to get permission to marry Cornelia. It's quite interesting, so worth a read. Maybe I'll see if I can post an excerpt from it later. So I'll definitely put links to copies of the maps, links to everything that I talk about, so you guys can go down your own little research rabbit hole later. I spent way too much time looking at genealogical charts this morning, which I was not anticipating. I'm not a genealogy person by nature, but when I started looking at family trees, I realized I had crossed a line this morning in my research, but it was fun, you know, and in the name of HAF research and program, so why not? Let me see, other streets, Clinton Street and Broad Street were ones that in the book reference other people, in the book Cradle of the Union reference other people that they're named for, but I knew that the street names had changed at some point, and I was curious as to what they had changed from. And so Clinton was Church Street, and which led me to said genealogical charts, where Angelica's husband was John Church. So I would make the assumption that that was named for him. And then the same with Broad Street, which had been named Yonkers at one point. I don't see a date on the document from the Hall of Records on when it was, but we know that name had been used a couple times downtown anyway, so it's not really a big surprise. But it was also known as Malcolm Street, and Malcolm is Catherine's husband. So we've got lots of extended family, but what I also find really interesting is that there's a couple children that don't seem to be represented on here. And so as I look at other street names, I'm wondering, were they changed a little bit? Delaware is one that kind of threw me. It seems really odd, and it's actually right up against the property. There's no street name for Angelica right around the house, and there's no street name for Schuyler's oldest son, John Bradstreet Schuyler, known as Bradstreet. I'll post a link to that. There's a fabulous little write-up about him in the Colonial Albany project that was done with the State Museum. So really interesting, which makes me wonder, was the Delaware renamed for one of them? But all the maps I've looked at so far have it as Delaware. So we'll see, maybe I'm totally wrong, who knows? Cradle of the Union doesn't have a whole lot about Delaware, unfortunately. There's little bits, and they kind of lump Delaware Avenue and Delaware Street together. And I think there's a lot of streets in Albany that have similar names that could be for different people, like apparently Clinton Street and Clinton Avenue are actually after two different Clintons. So there's that. What else was I looking at here? Oh, the other thing that I found really interesting when I was looking at Cradle of the Union, I'm going to switch maps to one a little bit further down to the east and slightly to the north. I guess it's not really that far to the north. It's oriented differently. is the Pastures neighborhood. And it's one of the really old neighborhoods in Albany. And we talk about that a lot. And we talk about how it was the pasture. And it is what I find interesting are the street names. And I didn't know this for a lot of them. I've done some research in the South End, but it never really occurred to me to wonder why some of the names are the way they are. And what I encountered was that it was actually named in two sections. So the pasture was the Dutch Reformed church pasture, and it was sold at an auction in 1791. And when the streets were laid out, let me see if I can find, I have an older map that I had up, and then I'm pretty sure I closed the tab. Shame on me. I'll share it in the comment section instead of fiddle with this and try and pull it up, because this one shows a really good layout. But the 1875 map, which is beautiful and in color, doesn't show all of the little streets in between. So it was initially platted, all of the streets were named after Dutch church ministers. So again, I'm pointing to the screen like you guys can totally see me point. Schuyler obviously is still the mansion. Rensselaer, okay, the Van Rensselaers, we don't need to go there. But Bassett was a minister. Even Lydius was as well. I don't have to look north. Westerlo, which of course is not on my map, but we can find that on Google Map real quick. Here we go. Okay, so several of these were actually named for pastors. This whole huge chunk of the pastures, all of them were pastors. So apparently Lydius was a pastor. Herkimer was renamed, where are my notes, from Van Schie. Dallius was for Reverend Dell. Westerlo was apparently a pastor. Arch Street, which of course I'm going south again. Arch Street continued all the way through, and this area here, there was a lot of urban renewal, and that was redone. The street pattern was changed a little bit, but you can see how Arch Street did go all the way through. It was kind of broken up. That was after Reverend Johnson. So I find it really interesting, and it went all the way to 4th Ave. I'm going to say Nucella, and I know that's wrong because I'm terrible at pronunciation, but we're going to go with that because that's what I got today. Back to my historic map because it's totally prettier than Google. Nucella is here listed as 4th. That was renamed. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the numbered streets have more to do with the annexation of Groesbeckville. On the 1850 map, you can see right at 4th Ave is the city line with Bethlehem. However, Groesbeckville was actually a small subset of Bethlehem. And I'm going to try and find a map. I know I've seen one, but this could be one of those imaginary things that Tony Opalka's used to, where I feel like I've seen a map for something about this, but whether it does or doesn't actually exist is God only knows. So if I can find a map of Groesbeckville, I will post that. But I have a sneaking suspicion that the numbered avenues have to do with the area that was Groesbeckville. So when that was annexed, I'm wondering if that's when the name was changed from Nucella to 4th. I haven't seen a number on that, but I know our esteemed city historian will know off the top of his head, unlike me, who's totally an amateur at this. The other naming structure that was laid over top of this was added later when the Pastures was further subdivided. They're called the fruit tree streets in Cradle of the Union. And as you can see here, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. So we've got our primary minister names, Bassett Dallius Church, another church in there. We also have Vine and Plum, with or without a B. There's Cherry, there's Mulberry. Apparently there was another one thrown in there, which is escaping me. It's not Arch because that was named for something else. But so those were added later. So just kind of interesting how things were laid over top of each other. And so you've got one street grid that references one, whether it's a property transaction or whatever. And then you've got another that has another whole different naming scheme. And what I actually would love to look at, I know someone has to have done this at some point, is to look at what type of naming schemes were popular when. Like, cause I always think of the kind of Helderberg neighborhood a little bit. And so you have all the wood streets, Parkwood, Fleetwood, you have Grove and all of that. And I keep wondering, is it more, City Beautiful movement? Is it where you have all of these, not Grover wooded named streets, but you have these streets that evoke open space. They're very earthy, kind of, arts and crafts, and, get out of the gritty city. So we're going to have these beautiful floral and tree and whatever names. I know there's documents out there for this. I just haven't gotten there yet. But yeah, so that is my apparently really lengthy ramble for today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because you don't need to see all the random stuff on my desktop. Hopefully this was of interest. Definitely something different, and I'd love to continue doing this. So if street names are interesting, I figured I'd pick another part of town, maybe Grosse Beckville next. We'll go there. There's lots of awesome names in the South End between Sloan and Tunis and Stephen and Odell, and they all have really great stories. And I love how a lot of streets, they're named for the people who lived around them or had something to do with the area, and I feel like it tells such a great bit of Albany history. And I love how Cradle of the Union, it's alphabetical because it's a great resource reference or document, but I love seeing it all on the map, and you can really get a sense of how the city was developed and when it was developed, based on the names and how the streets are even laid out. So we can get into more and more of that another day. If there's any neighborhood you guys would like me to check out, let me know, and we can go there, add stuff in the comments. So I'll post copies of the maps and then links to some other documents and things that I talked about, if you guys want to see that. And happy researching. Go look and see what your street was named for. So that's your homework for this week. So thank you all for joining me, and I shall see you in 2 weeks.